regulations. And also, Hungary is within the Schengen zone. The Schengen zone means that the European Union, so the European Union has a travel alliance, a border alliance. So once you enter a country which is part of the Schengen zone, you can travel freely within Europe. This will have a very big importance in the life of the Ukrainian refugees. So once you enter the Schengen zone legally with a passport, then you can travel. If you enter the Schengen zone as a refugee, then you have to stay in this country where you arrived, because there is an agreement which is called the Dublin II agreement, which limits refugees to stay in the country where they ask for asylum. So this will also have a very strong effect on the Ukrainian refugees' decisions and possibilities. And the last thing, that Hungary is not in the Eurozone. So even if we are in the political alliance of the European Union, we are not in the Eurozone, so not in the economic alliance of the European Union, partly because we are not doing well enough economically to be part of the Eurozone, and Hungary is not stable enough economically to be part of the Eurozone. So this is the situation of the two countries. So Ukraine is absolutely out of all these alliances. Hungary is part of it. So it might be a secure place for Ukrainian refugees, but we will see that it's not their preferred choice. So how is the relationship of the two countries? This is Ukraine, and Hungary is here, a little country, and this orange part is representing the Hungarian population in the Ukraine. It's back to 100 years now. After the First World War, there was a redistribution of European territories, and then some part of Hungary became a part of that time Ukraine or the Soviet Union, and these people were changing countries within a few years many times, because sometimes they belong to Hungary, sometimes to Slovakia, sometimes to Ukraine. That's a very typical story of Central Europe. But in any case, there is a Hungarian minority there, which will also make a big difference for the refugees. As for the numbers, in 2001 had Ukraine the last census. So they weren't politically, socially, or economically stable enough to run a census 10 years later, neither last year. But in 2001, as for the ethnic ratios of the population, the 78% of the population was ethnically Ukrainian, the 78%, the 17% was ethnically Russian. They are the red ones, and this is the Crimea, which was enacted by Russia 10 years ago, or 8 to 10 years ago. And then the Hungarian citizens is a really small group. It's 0.3% living at the border area with Hungary. Now, as it was a very political act in Hungary, but the Hungarian government about 10 years ago pushed through a bill which offered dual citizenship for everyone who has Hungarian ethnic background in wherever they live in the world. So they could apply for Hungarian dual citizenship, and they can also vote in the Hungarian parliamentary elections. So it was intended as a political act primarily, but now it will be also an important factor for refugees, because some of them do have the dual citizenship, and it's not always a blessing for them now. There are a lot of Roma people. So Roma, or they also call themselves gypsies, who are living in this territory. They are ethnically Romas, but also they speak Hungarian. So it's a very interesting thing because they do have the Hungarian ethnic background to a certain extent, but that's not their primary ethnic background. So it's a very, very mixed and very complex situation. And these people are extremely poor. Often they drop out of education before they even started. So many of them are illiterate. Many of them don't get to school at all. So, and these people are also escaping from the Ukraine. As they have a very weak educational background, they also have a very weak social status, and many of them don't have IDs, they don't have passports, and many of them were crossing the border with a birth certificate, which will put them into a very difficult situation because they can only go back once. So, because of this ethnic mixture of the border region, the Ukrainian-Hungarian relationship before the war wasn't undisturbed. Ukraine wrote a law in 2019, and last year, January, it became effective, which said that using Ukrainian language is compulsory in all the sectors. So in trade, in public services, in health services, Ukrainian language has to be used, which was problematic because it excluded a lot of people from working in such services who didn't speak Ukrainian, but only Hungarian or Russian or other. The law wasn't targeting Hungary. It was targeting the Russian population in Ukraine, but still it heavily influenced the opportunities of Hungarian-speaking people who didn't speak Ukrainian well. So that created a lot of tension, and of course, like nationalists always find these issues very important, and they start fighting with it internationally. The other strong issue within the Ukrainian-Hungarian relationship is the gas from Russia. Hungary is heavily dependent on Russian gas. That's how we heat. We have just as cold winters as you do have, and the Ukraine stopped the gas transport through Ukraine to Hungary, so Hungary had to export the gas through Austria, which again didn't work very well. And then because Russia didn't give the gas to Ukraine, then Hungary started to offer the gas from Austria, like through Hungary from Austria to Ukraine, and that improved the relations. And actually for the beginning or the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022, that was functioning very well. Like they had a large agreement on it, and that improved the relationship of the two countries. But at the end of February in 2022, Ukraine was invaded by Russia. It started in the border regions, and that's a very important date because we are not 3 months yet from that date, and 90 days will matter a lot in this story. So as for refugees in Europe and Hungary, the numbers used to be very, very low in Hungary. Like Europe was receiving quite a large number of refugees, especially in 2015 with the Syrian refugees, and the 16 was the continuation of that wave. But as you see in Hungary, especially after 2015, like in 2015, Hungary introduced a lot of anti-refugee policies. They stopped or they closed functioning refugee camps. They didn't want to receive any refugees, and the government reshaped the country to a transit country. So the government was supporting refugees to go through the country, but they didn't want anyone to stay. So as you can see, in 2020, we had 115 refugees altogether, which is a very low number. But that wasn't because there wouldn't be refugee people coming. It was because the government made it so difficult to claim asylum that people didn't claim asylum, and they were looking for routes which are passing by Hungary and not going in Hungary. Now, when the Ukrainian war started, refugees started to arrive. First, the middle class left Ukraine. That was the very first wave. There have been different groups of refugees passing through Hungary. So Hungary became a humanitarian corridor for many groups, students studying in Ukraine, employees of global enterprise or global companies. And a lot of people were really just transported to Hungary and then flew out to India, to Korea, to wherever in the world. That was very well organized and very much supported by the government. Really flawlessly, everybody was at the train stations, trains were coming in, there was a very good public transportation to the airport, and yeah, it was a very well functioning humanitarian corridor. There was another group of these refugees, or people escaping. I wouldn't say refugees because they are not refugees. These are just yet people escaping. This was the group of Ukrainian citizens who had passports. Ukrainian citizens have the right to enter the European Union or the Schengen zone with a Ukrainian passport without a visa, and they can stay for 90 days. These 90 days will expire for the first comers next week. So until then, they are legally staying in the Schengen zone as tourists. And that's what most of the people who could afford this financially and had a passport chose. They are staying in the Schengen zone as tourists. They didn't claim asylum yet because they were, first of all, they were hoping that it will be short, that they can return home. And it's a very big decision to decide where you want to start your life if you can decide about it. Of course, it comes with social status and it also comes with financial status. And then there is another group of refugees, so there who also have a this transitional attitude. So one is this 90 days with the Ukrainian passport in the Schengen zone, who stayed in Hungary because some of them just traveled through Hungary. We saw a lot of people standing at the money exchange shops, and they were changing the Ukrainian money to euro, and then left Hungary next day. This was very typical. But some of them stayed in Hungary because Hungary is relatively cheap compared to the European Union. So renting an apartment, sustaining your life for a temporary period is fine. But when you think about claiming asylum and then staying in the country because of the Dublin II agreement where you claim the asylum, that's a big decision. So these people now are still waiting or trying to decide what will happen. Now it's getting kind of clear that they cannot return to Ukraine very soon, but they need to decide where will they start their life. And then the other big group is the dual citizens. That's a very interesting question. I mentioned to you that the Hungarian ethnic minority in the Ukraine may have, or many of them may have, the Hungarian citizenship as well. And if you have a dual citizenship in a country within the Schengen zone or within the European Union, you are not entitled for a refugee status in another country because you have a citizenship in a safe country. And these people who have the citizenship are very often weren't even conscious about this. What does it mean that they have a citizenship? So they got the citizenship because it's good, they can travel free, you have a passport, but now it means something very different. Now it means that you have to stay in Hungary, which is not doing so well economically, which is not offering such a strong support. And many people are getting stuck. I will tell you a bit more later. And then there are the real asylum seekers. I mean, everybody is escaping here. but not everybody is claiming asylum in Hungary. There is a very small group of people who are claiming asylum in Hungary. They have a permanent attitude. They want to stay. They decided that they don't go further because they want to stay close to Ukraine. Many of them stay in the border, in the eastern border region of Hungary, because they hope that they can keep contact with their families. Many of them belong to those Roma groups who didn't have the passport, and they pass the border with the birth certificate. They cannot go back to Ukraine only once. So if they decide to go back because they decide that it's safe for them, they cannot come again to claim asylum. So they are very much exposed to this situation. Yeah, I talked about the Dublin II regulation. And yeah, so these people are not very large in number. Like, I only could access the data till May 2. I just told Violetta that it disappeared, the website disappeared, which was offering the official data. It's also political and economic, and that's about the dealing with the European Union and the funding of refugees. But until the early May, there were 700,000 people escaping through Hungary. And out of them, only 20,000 claimed asylum in Hungary. So a really, really small portion, though it's a lot of people. And out of the 20,000, half of them are children. So it's about 10,000 children. What is really frightening and for the Hungarian education system, because it's very unprepared for it, is that half of the refugees are children who are claiming asylum in Hungary. And if there would be a larger wave of refugees, then probably the proportion would stay the same. So these are the people who are escaping from the Ukraine. Yeah, so these are the numbers that I were telling you about. And half of the applications have been approved by early May. So the approval is going very fast and almost automatically for those who are claiming asylum. However, the UNHCR is estimating that in Hungary, there is 100,000 to 140,000 people who are just staying with their tourist passport. So we don't know what will happen to these people if they are staying in Hungary, if they can go further. The large question is if they can afford financially to go further, because most of them have the intention to claim asylum somewhere else if they cannot persist. But they are tourists, so nobody knows about them. They don't register anywhere. They just rent an Airbnb apartment and then they are just there. So what is the state doing? First of all, it's just as in 2015, it supports the transit through the country. So in Budapest at the train stations, and they also set up a central transit coordination camp in a sports facility. And then there is support for asylum seekers and refugees, but this support is very minimal. So they get a community accommodation, they get minimum care, so they can get the food too, so they have somewhere to sleep, but these are like dormitory-like accommodations, and they get some food, but it's not quality food, but enough to survive. And everything else is coming from NGOs. The interesting situation is that the state only allows or wants to allow church-funded NGOs into this situation. They don't want to have the civilian organizations getting involved, which is again a political step. But these church-related aid organizations are working on arranging accommodation, work opportunities for refugees, and actually it's supported financially by the European Union and also by the Hungarian state to give work to these refugees, and also they have access to healthcare. All the people who claim asylum are automatically get access to all public and social services and also to the healthcare, and they also get a language training for 520 hours. The important fact from our perspective that the children are entitled to enter the Hungarian public education until the age of 18 once they arrive to Hungary, and also they will be entitled to enter the higher education. So on March the 3, a week after the conflict or the war started, the Hungarian ministry responsible for education issued a policy recommendation, which was regulating a few perspectives of the situation of children in Hungary with refugees or asylum seekers. And so one is that they can enter, like they were informing the refugees, and they made a strong campaign for schools too, to make them aware that these children are entitled to enter the education system from the moment when they are submitting the asylum. So at the moment when they decide for staying in Hungary, they also are entitled to go to the public education services. But most of the refugees are not asking for their asylum, so their children are not provided with such a support. Also, the validation of previous studies, because many of the people escaped without their certificates, the validation of the previous studies went to the school principals. So the school's principals can decide about if they accept the previous studies just by credibility of the parents or the students. The legal conditions of integrating students with refugees or asylum seeker students in the schools is based on the constitution, that they have the access to it, and the European Union put some financial support next to it, and it's 350 euro per month per child to the school, which does cover the extra working hours, but it's not a lot. And then there is the language issue. So if you remember the ethnic compound of the region, there are some Hungarian speakers. Those who speak Hungarians because are ethnic Hungarians can do a full integration, except for the Roma children who were dropping out of school. But in Hungary, they are for them, it would be compulsory to be in school, but they don't, many of them are illiterate. So it will be a major challenge. For the non-Hungarian speakers, there is a nice idea, but it's not very functional, because the government suggests 5 to 7 hours per week individual mentoring, which means that in 5 to 7 hours per week, students should like catch up and learn the language. That's we know, we work in this area, that is not realistic. So the NGOs are stepping in this language tuition and integration process. And the government encourages NGOs, but it only offers financial support to church-related NGOs, and it's not offering financial support for non-church-related NGOs. And most of the NGOs who are dealing with second chance schools and dealing with dropout students are non-church-related NGOs, like they have the most experience. So that's a very difficult contradiction there. And the government policy also says that the school year should be repeated by students for language learning. We also know that it's an idea, but not necessarily the best. So what is happening with the diverse groups? What they want and what they can get. Those who are with the tourist visas, they would like to continue their education according to the Ukrainian system in Ukrainian language. This is something which is unimaginable for the Hungarian government, because the regulation is that they enter the Hungarian schools and continue their studies in Hungarian. But you see how difficult it is. Like, you are coming from a country, you would like to return to that education system. And now you start to learn a completely useless language for your future. Like, you don't know anything about Hungary. It's a small country with no too big opportunities, not a good economy. In Europe, it's no future for them. So that's a very big dilemma there. And what they are doing, they are setting up their own schools. But that's, again, a very big challenge because you are in a country, you don't know the regulations, you try to set up schools, but these schools are not legally approvable. You don't even have the permission to have children in a room for educational purposes if it's not approved by the government. So it's a very dangerous situation for these people and for this organization because they are good-willing, but they are violating the law in many respects, unfortunately. For the Hungarian-speaking middle class, school integration is an easy thing. For the Hungarian-speaking Roma and the poor who has been dropping out already in Ukraine, it's a very difficult situation. And the numbers show that these people will be the asylum seekers in Hungary, because most of these people have the dual citizenship. These people will be asylum seekers, or they also have the dual citizenship, but these children who don't speak Hungarian, who are illiterate, will stay in Hungary, and the Hungarian education system has very little responses to such children in large number. I mean, right now, let's say half of the 10 million or half of the 10,000, that is still a lot of children. And these students, because they have the ethnic background of the Roma community, they are also poor. They really strongly face the danger of discrimination in schools and in any other social setting. And yeah, so, and there are the Hungarian, the non-Hungarian speakers in general. We don't know what will happen to them. Like, nobody is prepared for teaching them Hungarian. There are no structural responses on this, except for those 5 to 7 hours per week, which is quite weak response. So what are the challenges for the schools? Of course, the language and writing. And for those students who don't speak Hungarian and didn't learn another foreign language, the alphabet will be a challenge, because the Ukrainian language has a Cyrillic alphabet, the Hungarian language has a Latin alphabet, so that's already a challenge which has to be addressed. And also, Hungarian teachers are lacking foreign language skills, so it's difficult to communicate with students. Often they are asking Hungarian-speaking refugee children who are already there to translate, to support, but we know that this is again a very difficult and challenging situation. There are the psychological problems which are now very strongly present in schools. These children, who are refugee children, are strongly traumatized, and they need psychological help, but it's very difficult to offer. NGOs are organizing it. For example, our colleagues at our faculty are organizing psychological help for children, but systematically, it's not enough. It's just a few people's goodwill. Also, there are a lot of missing certificates, but as I mentioned before, this is in the authority of the school principals, what they accept and what they don't accept, so that seems to be answered. And there are a lot of not accompanied minors who travel alone, but they are not having the right to sign anything, and they cannot enter the school system. They cannot even claim asylum without an adult's signature. That's a very difficult situation. So what is happening in Hungary, I read a few stories about it, that colleagues working at NGOs are formally adopting these children to be able to sign the documents so they can enter the schools, which is a very difficult and challenging situation. But these things are happening. This is a war which is running, and people are really trying to help. And then what NGOs are doing is that they are running Ukrainian language instruction teaching courses for those who have this tourist status at the moment. They are offering the psychological counseling. they are running Hungarian as a second language courses, and they are also trying to outreach to the society. They are trying to involve volunteers and train volunteers on how to work, for example, with traumatized children. And also they are trying to create support for teachers who are in this situation, which is, they are just not prepared for at all. I mean, there is no teacher on the world who would be prepared for such a challenge. So NGOs are organizing dissemination events for teachers who have experiences, and they can share with their own good practices. There was one research already running at our faculty, and that was looking at who are the volunteers dealing with Ukrainian refugees. Like what makes people to help the refugees, and who are they? And it's like they ran an online survey. They got over 2,000 answers, and it seems that it's mostly females, mostly from the capital, Budapest, mostly from the political left, and they are very likely, besides helping, they are very likely to donate something for the refugees. So they are donating money or objects besides their work. And 30% of these people who helped, they did volunteer in person at train stations, and they were helping the transit process when the humanitarian corridor was open. And 14% of all people did host refugees in their home. I think that's a really nice number, but there is a really ugly number after that. 25% of these people who were helping the Ukrainian refugees would not help refugees from Africa, Syria, or Roma ethnic groups. So there is this racial differentiation between refugees. And Ukrainian refugees, European Ukrainian refugees are much more warmly welcomed than any other refugees from the world, which is a very warning sign about Hungarian population, because this is a small group of people who volunteered. So let's imagine the whole society. That's very sad. So what can be done to keep the system running and become sustainable? One thing for sure is that a cooperation should be built out between sectors. This is very much missing now. Like, there is no coordination. There are random connections between representatives of the sectors, because they have been working together before, but there is no structural coordination. And this is something which could be done by both the state and the NGOs. And also the universities could take part of it, but I think these are the main actors. Of course, the financial support should be kept running, and the EU is supporting this with financials. And what would be very much necessary, that the state takes care of having a real educational policy, not only a few directives which have been issued. And in that policy making, all the actors of this educational scenario should be included. This is not happening yet. We are trying to set up an alliance with an NGO, which is including schools and universities, to create an advisory group and offer services for the state. We don't know if they are open to accept it or not. That's a difficult situation. Of course, schools can work and create intercultural pedagogical programs. We do have such programs from the past. We have been working on this, so we can offer support for this. But again, the communication is very important, that we can reach, or schools can reach us at the university for help. And of course, the NGOs have a very strong and important role here, because schools cannot deal with the situation alone. And the NGOs with educational programs can help the schools, but they could also help teachers, and they also could help the families. So NGOs probably will have a very important role in this situation. And the universities can support scientifically the work of all the other actors. And what is, I think, is coming, not necessarily in Hungary, but in the European Union, is validation programs for teachers from the Ukraine for their degrees so they can teach in the host countries. And of course, like the situation should be researched. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope it was interesting. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the next presentations. And
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. Maybe before proceeding to the next presentation, just one question
yes, please.
would be welcome. Okay. Maybe you could identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Solreem Tanim. I was wondering if you could go into more detail as someone, I'm also in teacher education, and while you were presenting, I was thinking about this very common sentence I've been hearing since I grew up in here in the US, and now I've been here, and we're talking to you and we're thinking about 다문화 and migrants and education, and I've been hearing in Massachusetts, in Korea, in your presentation, how schools and teachers aren't prepared for a quote new or quote sudden influx of students from different countries who speak multiple languages. And I was wondering if you could talk more about what it is about teacher education in general that could be conceived of differently so that all teachers are prepared for a very real mobile world.
I think it's a very, like it's a deeply rooted problem. Education is in all the countries is perceived as a national thing.
Yeah.
Coming with the national ethos, the national culture, the national language, the national interest. Nobody perceives, no country perceives education, public education as a global issue. On the other hand, the world is global. It's changing. There are migrants, there are people escaping, there are refugees, there are travelers, and it's the mindset, I think. And it should be or could be the work of education and teacher education to open this mindset, but it's a long work. And policies, knowledge construction in general, like what kind of research and development projects are funded, are not favoring multicultural education. So I think that's our work to make it a stronger field and to emphasize these issues more, I don't know, that it's easier to understand for people who are not concerned or haven't been concerned with it before. If it's an answer.
Yes. And this idea, this is what I've been centering around, this realization that education is conceived of as a national project around the world. And so my question, you know, upon thinking this is why and how? Are there historical, in every single country, are there historical processes that set up education systems that make it inherently a national project? Or what do you think about why education is conceived of as national?
I'm not an education historian. I can make an educated guess.
Yeah.
I think it, like national education systems, at least in Europe, came in the 17th, 18th century. In the that's where they started, and they were established to create people who can read and write